The first and most unsettling revelation from the Epstein files is that they do not merely point to isolated misconduct by a single powerful individual. Instead, they expose a broader, carefully protected network of wealth, political influence, and institutional silence. This is crucial because focusing only on one name allows the system that enabled the abuse to remain intact. What the documents suggest is that power in modern societies rarely operates alone. It functions through relationships between financiers and politicians, between donors and institutions, between influence and immunity. The files indicate that access itself is a form of protection. When individuals possess vast economic resources, they gain entry into exclusive political, social, and legal circles where accountability operates differently. Investigations slow down, questions become cautious, and consequences are negotiated rather than enforced. This is not an accidental failure of justice. It is a predictable outcome of a system where wealth grants leverage over institutions that are supposed to remain neutral. The network revealed here thrives not on overt conspiracy, but on mutual benefit and unspoken understanding. Another striking aspect is the role of silence. Silence does not happen on its own, it is produced and maintained. Lawyers draft agreements, institutions issue careful statements, media outlets delay coverage, and authorities narrow the scope of inquiry. Each participant may claim they were only doing their job, yet the cumulative effect is the same: protection for the powerful and invisibility for those harmed. The files show how silence becomes a shared responsibility, distributed so widely that no single actor feels fully accountable. This network also relies heavily on respectability. Prestigious affiliations, elite universities, charitable foundations, high profile social events serve as shields. They create an image of legitimacy that discourages scrutiny and discredits accusations. When power is wrapped in philanthropy and status, it becomes harder for society to confront the damage being done behind closed doors. The files suggest that reputations were not merely personal assets, they were strategic defenses. Political influence plays a critical role as well. Connections to policymakers and influential figures do not always need to result in direct intervention. Often their mere existence is enough to deter aggressive action. Officials anticipate backlash, legal complications, or career consequences and choose caution over confrontation. The Epstein files reflect how political proximity can quietly shape outcomes long before any decision reaches public view. Perhaps most troubling is how normalized this network appears to be. There is little indication of panic or urgency in the early stages of scrutiny. Instead, there is patience, delay, and confidence that the system will absorb the problem. This reveals a deep expectation among elites that protection is not exceptional but routine. The files therefore force a broader question: how many similar networks operate beyond public awareness, functioning smoothly because they have never been disrupted by exposure? By revealing patterns rather than just names, the Epstein files challenge the comforting belief that injustice is rare and accidental. They show that when wealth, power, and institutions intersect without meaningful oversight, protection becomes systemic. Accountability is not denied outright, it is postponed, diluted, and redirected until public attention fades. What emerges is a portrait of a system designed less to uncover truth than to manage damage, preserving stability at the top while risk and harm are pushed downward. The second keynote centers on a deeply uncomfortable reality revealed by the Epstein files. Legal systems and elite institutions do not fail equally for everyone. Instead, they repeatedly bend under the weight of economic power, transforming justice from a universal principle into a flexible privilege. The documents demonstrate that the law, often presented as neutral and blind, becomes highly adaptable when confronted with wealth, status, and influence. What emerges is a pattern where legal outcomes are not determined solely by evidence or harm, but by access to resources. High-powered legal teams, prolonged litigation strategies, and private negotiations create an uneven playing field long before a case ever reaches public scrutiny. The files suggest that delays were not procedural accidents, but strategic advantages, allowing time to exhaust victims, shift public attention, and reduce urgency. Justice delayed in this context becomes justice redesigned. Elite institutions play a crucial supporting role in this process. Universities, financial firms, charitable organizations, and even regulatory bodies often appear as cautious observers rather than active defenders of ethical standards. Their hesitation is rarely framed as complicity. It is described as neutrality, due process, or institutional restraint, yet the effect is unmistakable. When institutions depend on elite funding, political goodwill, or reputational stability, they develop incentives to avoid confrontation, even when credible allegations exist. The files also highlight how legal accountability becomes fragmented. Cases are settled privately, charges are narrowed, jurisdictions are divided, and responsibility is dispersed across agencies. This fragmentation ensures that no single authority confronts the full scope of misconduct. Each institution handles a piece of the problem, small enough to manage, small enough to justify restraint. The broader pattern, however, remains untouched, allowing systemic abuse to persist beneath the surface of procedural correctness. Another revealing aspect is how the language of legality is used to mask inequality. Terms like plea agreement, confidential settlement, and insufficient evidence sound impartial, yet the files reveal how these outcomes are often unavailable to those without resources. For ordinary individuals, the law is rigid and punitive. For the wealthy, it is negotiable, adaptive, and forgiving. This duality undermines public faith, not because people misunderstand the system, but because they understand it too well. Political influence further reinforces this imbalance. When powerful individuals maintain proximity to lawmakers, donors, or influential figures, the legal system absorbs that pressure indirectly. Prosecutors weigh career risks, regulators anticipate political consequences, and institutions choose caution over courage. The files indicate that justice is not overtly obstructed, it is quietly softened, reshaped through professional discretion and institutional self preservation. Perhaps most revealing is how normalized this bending of the law has become. There is little evidence of alarm within elite circles when extraordinary leniency is granted. Instead, there is confidence that the system will accommodate power as it has done before. This normalization transforms inequality from an exception into an expectation, teaching elites that consequences are manageable and teaching the public that accountability is conditional. The Epstein files thus reveal not a broken legal system, but one functioning exactly as designed within an economy where wealth translates into leverage, influence, and protection at every institutional level. The third keynote examines how secrecy mechanisms, non disclosure agreements, private settlements, sealed records, and prolonged investigative delays operate as normalized instruments of power rather than exceptional legal tools. The Epstein files make clear that secrecy is not incidental to the system, it is foundational. These mechanisms are deployed not simply to resolve disputes, but to manage risk, contain information, and preserve reputations long before accountability becomes a public possibility. Non disclosure agreements stand at the center of this structure. On paper, they are framed as mutual protections designed to bring closure. In practice, the files show how they function asymmetrically. Individuals with limited financial and legal resources are pressured into silence through the threat of litigation, penalties, or prolonged exposure. For the wealthy, NDAs act as cost effective barriers that prevent stories from spreading, patterns from forming, and scrutiny from escalating. Silence becomes a purchase commodity, and truth becomes a negotiable expense. Private settlements reinforce this silence by removing disputes from public courts, where testimony, evidence, and precedent could otherwise accumulate. The files reveal how settlements repeatedly interrupt the natural progression of accountability. Each case is isolated, resolved quietly, and legally concluded without admitting wrongdoing. This fragmentation ensures that misconduct is never examined in its full scope. What might appear as repeated behavior is legally transformed into unrelated incidents, making systemic analysis nearly impossible. Delayed investigations add another strategic layer. Time, as revealed in the documents, operates as a form of power. When inquiries are postponed, evidence deteriorates, witnesses disengage, and emotional and financial exhaustion takes its toll. Delays also allow public attention to shift, reducing pressure on institutions to act decisively. The files suggest that delay is rarely neutral. It benefits those who can afford to wait and harms those who cannot sustain prolonged uncertainty. Secrecy is further reinforced by institutional practices. Law firms, corporations, and affiliated organizations coordinate responses that prioritize containment over disclosure. Internal reviews are conducted behind closed doors, findings are summarized rather than released, and cooperation with external oversight is tightly managed. Each step is justified through legal prudence or reputational concern, yet collectively, these actions create an environment where transparency is treated as a liability rather than a responsibility. The language used to defend secrecy plays a crucial role. Confidentiality is framed as fairness, privacy, or professionalism. The files reveal how this language masks inequality by presenting secrecy as neutral while its effects remain profoundly uneven. Those with power gain protection from scrutiny, while those without power are denied the ability to speak openly about their experiences. The appearance of legality conceals the reality of imbalance. Secrecy also reshapes public perception. Without access to detailed information, allegations appear incomplete, credibility becomes contested, and attention dissipates quickly. The absence of visible patterns allows influential individuals to maintain authority and legitimacy despite repeated accusations. The files demonstrate that secrecy does not merely hide misconduct, it actively restructures how society understands it. What emerges from the Epstein files is a portrait of secrecy as a deliberate system of governance within elite spaces. It is not activated in moments of crisis alone, but maintained continuously through contracts, procedures, and professional norms. This system ensures that reputational preservation consistently outweighs the pursuit of full disclosure and that accountability remains conditional, delayed, and incomplete. The fourth keynote emphasizes the critical role of institutions, universities, charitable organizations, financial firms, and media outlets in enabling elite misconduct, often under the guise of neutrality or professional responsibility. The Epstein files reveal that these institutions, far from being passive bystanders, frequently function as structural enablers of power, prioritizing funding, access, and prestige over accountability. Their involvement demonstrates how systemic protection for the powerful is reinforced not only by legal mechanisms, but also by organizational and social frameworks. Universities, for example, appear repeatedly in the files as sites where influence is cultivated and reputations are maintained. Donations, endowed positions, and sponsored research projects create incentives to avoid scrutiny. Allegations against high profile benefactors are often met with caution, internal review, or minimal public acknowledgement rather than decisive action. In effect, these institutions serve as buffers, protecting those who have the resources to shape educational and social agendas while discouraging criticism that could jeopardize institutional standing. Charitable organizations perform a similar function. Philanthropic contributions are frequently presented as evidence of moral commitment, social responsibility, or public service. Yet the files suggest that these donations also operate strategically, insulating donors from investigation and reinforcing social legitimacy. When institutions accept substantial gifts from powerful individuals, they may consciously or unconsciously avoid challenging behavior, creating an implicit system of protection. Charities, therefore, can become instruments that enhance the reputations of individuals under scrutiny while minimizing exposure to accountability. Financial institutions, too, play a critical role in maintaining systemic immunity. They provide the logistical and economic infrastructure that allows complex networks of influence to function smoothly. The files indicate that financial oversight, compliance procedures, and institutional vigilance are often tempered by the desire to maintain client relationships and secure revenue streams. As a result, questionable activities may be ignored, delayed, or obscured through bureaucratic processes, ensuring that transactions and associations remain largely insulated from public view. Media institutions, long regarded as watchdogs, are not immune to these dynamics. The files show patterns of delayed reporting, minimized coverage, or framing allegations as isolated scandals rather than part of systemic misconduct. This is not necessarily the result of malice, but of structural dependence. Media outlets rely on access, advertising, and public relations relationships to function effectively. The outcome is a subtle yet powerful form of censorship, where stories that could challenge elite power are underemphasized or presented in a way that reduces their perceived significance. Collectively, these institutional behaviors demonstrate that accountability is rarely a product of individual conscience alone. It is deeply shaped by organizational incentives, social hierarchies, and systemic pressures. Institutions that depend on elite support often develop internal norms that favor discretion over transparency, continuity over confrontation, and reputation over responsibility. The Epstein files reveal how this alignment of interests produces a consistent pattern. Misconduct is tolerated, facilitated, or rendered invisible as long as it remains strategically advantageous to the institutions involved.